Vaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. First thing is, I want to thank you all for being here. And today is an extremely auspicious day. It is the disappearance day of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So we have a Bhagavatam verse we'll talk about, and we'll tie that verse into the life of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And it's hard to estimate the importance of Bhaktivinoda Thakur in our line. So we'll try to give a little history, give a little context, and why is he so important. And personally, for me, there is, oops, I said disappearance. Somebody correct me, appearance day. Thank you for that. As we say in our philosophy, there's not much difference between them, but there is a dis that separates appearance from disappearance. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is really, you might say, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement. If we go into the context of 1800s, he was born approximately I think it was 1838. And he was born September 2nd, 1838. And if we look at the life of the times of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, we find that the Vaishnava philosophy had, to some degree, the Lord Chaitanya had lived 400 years prior, and much of the teachings had been lost. Sahajis, those who practiced religious principles for the sake of having orgies, to put it bluntly, had infiltrated the Vaishnava culture. Meanwhile, you have the British had taken over India. Anybody know what year the British took over India? Anybody that can tell me? When did the British take over India? And how did that happen? Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a witness to all this, but he avoided the politics. He didn't want politics. He wanted to know the meaning of life. Can somebody tell me what year? Anybody raise their hand or put in the chat?
1858. I looked that up.
Yeah, very good. Now, here's how this happened. And I know this very intimately because I was working with a law professor at the University of Florida on a project for a client of mine. And I'd hired this professor to help me. And we became friends, and we would meet every week. And I said to him, Professor, I will miss our Monday morning meetings for 3 weeks. I'm going to India. And he turns to me and says, can I go with you? Well, he was 10 years older than me, an Englishman. I mean, I can't imagine why he would want to go to India. Turns out his great, great, great uncle won India for the British Crown. And I'll briefly tell the story of what happened. And the professor did go to India with me, and we had a great historical tour. But the British Army changed to the Enfield rifle in the 1850s. And that rifle required that before a soldier could shoot, they had to bite off the end of the bullet and load it in. Just one bullet at a time, more like musket type rifles. And the East India Company ran the East India Company, was a corporation. And then India was a bunch of these kingdoms, with the main kingdom run by the emperor of the Mughal Empire, based in Agra and Delhi. And then a lot of little kingdoms, some Hindu, some Muslim, some whatever. So the army then was really the army of the East India Company. It was a private government-sanctioned company that, and all of the soldiers, called sepoys, were Hindus or Muslims, and all of the officers were white from England. And rumor came that the bullets were coated in fat to make them for lubrication purposes, and the fat was either pig fat or cow fat. Well, that offended the Hindus and the Muslims both. And they became so horribly offended that they rebelled and started killing their British officers. And it was a major rebellion. At that point, it looked like the British were out of India. Then there's one Major Hopkins, who was my friend's distant relative, was able, by divide and conquer techniques, which the British are famous for, defeat the rebellion. And then when the rebellion was defeated, India was declared a crown colony of Britain. And it became, and Queen Victoria became the Emperor of India. So this is the scene that Bhaktivinoda Thakur is living with. This time when the British had a great intellectual and political influence over everything that went on in India. So India was facing modernity, and it was also philosophical challenges. These challenges came from two places. One, internal, in that we had the Sahajas who would practice violating regulative principles in the name of religion. If that sounds weird, it is. And then you had the external influence of the influence from the British Raj and the Western philosophers. So in that particular milieu, we have Bhaktivinoda Thakur growing up. Now, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was born into a quite wealthy family, both on his grandfather's side on his mother and grandfather's side on his father. Then when he was a young boy, around 10 to 12, his father died, his grandfather died, all the money was lost, and he became quite poor. But he was a fantastic student and always desired to learn more. So we're going to look in this context at Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was young, before his father died, and I'm reading from this fantastic book called I can't get it in focus, but it's called The Seventh Goswami, a biography by Rupa Vilas. Excellent book, highly recommended. Even while my father was living, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, I became a little thoughtful. What is this world? Who are we? These questions were in my mind when I was 10 years old. On some days, I thought I had the answers. On other days, I had none. He started reading Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Kali Purana, other Bengali manuscripts. And I would discuss these topics with whoever I meet who was a little learned. And this is very much like, for those who know the story of Maharaj Parikshit, who examined everything around him after emerging from the womb, looking for Krishna. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a seeker of the first order. He had a mystical grandfather who retired to Orissa. And his grandfather could see the future and had great abilities. And his grandfather called for Bhaktivinoda to come. So Bhaktivinoda came to see his grandfather. Grandfather, who seemed in great health and everything fine, said, I will soon be leaving this world. And then he gave a blessing to Bhaktivinoda and says, when you are 27 years old, your life will change. And then his grandfather sat down, went into a meditative pose, and his life heirs left in front of Bhaktivinoda Thakur through the top of his head, the way yogis can leave when they like to. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very disturbed. He lost his father, lost his grandfather, lost his wealth. He says, why is all this happening? And he went through great illnesses. Most of his life, he would be healthy and then get these terrible fevers and sometimes boils. And so he went more and more inner, trying to find out what is the meaning. Meanwhile, he went on with his studies, and he was so smart and so bright that the government would promote him, and he took positions, became the district magistrate, which is the equivalent of a judge. And he did many famous cases. One case was one Bogey yogi was who could shoot fire from his eyes, and some mystic power. This yogi came and claimed to be Mahavishnu. And he said, I am Vishnu. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but he was also having sex with people's wives, and it wasn't exactly Vishnu-like. So this Bhaktivinoda Thakur came with a squadron of police to arrest him. He said, you cannot arrest me. I have all these powers, and made flames come out of his hair. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur arrested him anyway. The yogi was tried. At the trial, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there was curses. The one day the yogi said, go home, there'll be tragedy. And his daughter was almost died, but she lived. And the yogi said, you continue this, more tragedy will happen. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself got sick, dragged himself to court anyway, and convicted him. And then this so-called Vishnu was sent to jail, and he poisoned himself in jail and died. This was the power of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I have a similar story myself. When I was living in India as a high school teacher, before I was a devotee, I was in the mood of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, certainly not with the realization or depth, but in the mood trying to find out what's it all about? What is the meaning? How do I know who are the real followers of the Gita? And how do I know who are the ones who are just making up a story? And I was living at that time in Patna. I was assigned there for a while. And Patna is a city in Bihar on the banks of the Ganges. And I heard about this yogi who could do all kinds of mystic things. So I thought, that's really cool. So I went to his ashram. And his ashram was easy for me to find because it used to be the headquarters for the Peace Corps, who I worked for. And then when I got there was Westerners in saris and kurtas. And Westerners means they speak English. My Hindi was not great. I could speak with them, talk to them. I said, what are you here for? What's it about? What are you trying to learn? Well, our guru is God. I said, well, a little suspiciously, that's interesting. My guru is God. Your guru is God. Wow. Can I meet him? Who doesn't want to meet God? I mean, that's kind of interesting. So I said, well, he's in prison. He's in prison. Your God's in prison. I said, oh, no. They didn't say he was in prison. They said he's in the hospital. I said, God in the hospital? Well, I heard a story about Krishna having a headache. I don't know, but which hospital? I'll go visit him in the hospital then. Well, he's in the prison hospital because he was arrested. Oh, well, what's wrong with him that he's in the prison hospital and now he's arrested? And they told me what was wrong with him. And he was in the prison hospital because his hemorrhoids were so bad that he had to be hospitalized. And I was thinking, okay, I can't imagine God being in a hospital with bad hemorrhoids. So I scratched him off my list of people who might be the teachers who can give me some kind of enlightenment. Scratch that one off. Then I met another yogi. I was in, not meeting a yogi, a follower. I was in Delhi and I saw a clean-cut American my age walking around the Connaught area. And immediately I walked up to him and said, what are you doing here? Because the only people I would ever meet my age in the 70s in India were hippies that were from the West. There wasn't anybody else, period. So here's a clean-cut guy. He said, what are you doing here? He says, well, I came to find God. I said, well, we have something in common. Well, let's go to lunch. So we're talking. And I said, what did you find? Well, I met a guru and he knows Gita inside out. I said, that's cool. Wow. That's so cool. And what does he do? Well, he can make ashes appear out of his hand. I said, mystic powers, that's even cooler. And he can do other mystical things and make milk come out of a statue. I said, wow, that's so cool. And he knows the Gita, he's mystic, he's everything. I said, by the way, what are you doing in Delhi? Well, I'm going home. Well, if you came to India to find God, you found him and you told me you were his personal assistant. Why would you be going home? This is why you came. What makes you leave? And he said, well, I got tired of him reaching into my pants, to put it bluntly. And he was a pervert and he just couldn't take it. So I'm telling these personal stories because this was the same kind of scene that Bhaktivinoda Thakur found, that great religious leaders were also weirdos. And the question is, there's a saying at baseball games, how do you tell the player? You need a scorecard to tell the players, oh, number 7, that's Mickey Mantle, I think, or number this is so-and-so. Who are the players? You need a scorecard because you can only see their numbers. You can't see their faces. So when I went to India trying to find the scorecard to find who's real. Well, of course, I found Prabhupada. That was easy. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, at these circumstances, he was trying to find out who was real. And then his guru, Jagannath Das Babaji, brought him the rest of the way to become initiated in our line. So I'm trying to set the stage a little bit for who Bhaktivinoda Thakur is. Now, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had an interesting day. He wrote extensively. He wrote the first books in English. In fact, he sent one to McGill University Library, which is no longer there because some devotee stole it from the library. But anyway, these things happen. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his day was like this. He was never idle. He would, between about 8 o'clock at night, he'd go to bed for 2 hours, get up, light his oil lamp, and write books till 4. He'd rest for a half hour. Then he would wash up, chant for another few hours. 7 o'clock, he'd do his correspondence, then read. He always carried a pocket watch, exactly 8:30, he received visitors. If there were none, he'd read till 9:30. Then after that, he would have his thinking time. He'd walk back and forth and think for a half hour. Then he'd rest briefly, take his bath, have breakfast. At exactly 9:55, he would put on his uniform, go to court, what would take everyone all day. He would finish in a half a day. And then at night, he would write books, dictating it to his secretary. So he lived an extremely regulated life. There's so much to say about Bhaktivinoda Thakur. One thing I'll jump to, and I do have a Bhagavatam verse to eventually get to, is many of the famous songs we sing are by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. For example, Jaya Radha Madhava, which we normally begin Bhagavatam classes with, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songs express a humility. And for those of you who have participated in Sharanagati sections, his Sharanagati, they express a humility that's very rare. We all know that Lord Chaitanya said we can chant the holy name when we're more humbler than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree. But these are often words to me. But when I read about Bhaktivinoda Thakur and read his songs, these words enter my real life. So I'll read a little bit from his Gopinath Prayer, which is one of my favorites. O Gopinath, you are my only hope. I have taken shelter. How will you purify me? I know not what devotion is, and my materialistic mind is absorbed in fruit of work. I have fallen into dark and perilous existence. I have no strength or knowledge. This body of mine is not independent and free from the control of material nature. Now listen to this. O Gopinath, this sinner was weeping and weeping, begs for an eternal place at your divine feet. Please give him your mercy. You are able to do anything, and therefore you have the power to deliver all sinners. Who is there that is more of a sinner than myself? You are an ocean of mercy. Having come into this phenomenal world, you expand your divine pastimes for the sake of the souls. Gopinath, I am so sinful. Although all the demons attain your lotus feet, I remain in worldly existence. This is the inner mood of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And this is not some presentation of false humility. One time, one devotee went to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, I am the most fallen of anyone. And Prabhupada turned to him and said, you are not the most anything. So that sense, we sometimes have that sense of false humility. Oh, Prabhu, I am most fallen, but I want you to know you're an idiot. You know, we sometimes think or speak like that. But when Bhaktivinoda presented it, it really was. And we can see from the way he lived his life and all the interactions he had, all these thoughts and prayers came from the core of his heart. Yet he was stranded two worlds, the Vaishnava world and the British world. What some of you don't know is the name of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's dog. Does anybody know the name of his dog that you can tell me? Does anybody know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a dog? He would walk his dog, and his dog was named Tiger, which is ironic because a tiger is a cat. So with a little humor, he had a dog he would walk named Tiger. He would dress in the British way. And at other times he'd wear the traditional dhoti. And he could move in and out of both worlds. Now, this is very applicable to me personally, because one of my services, I'm the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. So we are studying the intersection of science and spirituality. So we have to understand, how do we understand this ancient tradition and all these kind of, like the fifth canto, and deciphering all of this, and how do we fit it in with the modernity of the Webb telescope and everything else we're learning in astrophysics, fitting in with the fifth canto. So my personal inspiration of walking this tightrope of modernity and antiquity is Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because he was expert at walking that tightrope and understanding the great value, as Prabhupada did. Prabhupada would say, science has done things wonderful, but there's a pinprick, and the pinprick is they don't understand that life comes from life. Life doesn't come from matter. So in a similar way, Bhaktivinoda Thakur grabbed the modernity, like Bhakti Siddhanta, his son, would drive in a motor car, which sannyasis would never do. If it got him to more preaching engagements, that's what I'm going to do. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was not stuck with traditions for the sake of tradition, yet he picked up the essence of the tradition. In other words, he walked that tightrope by taking the essence of the tradition and applying it to modernity. Prabhupada gave us two paradoxical instructions. One, don't change anything. Two, adjust everything to time, place, and circumstance. And where did Prabhupada get his inspiration? Clearly from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because both of them were expert at dealing with modernity and antiquity. In our present day ISKCON, sometimes we're not so good at it. Sometimes we'll just follow some ritual just for the sake of it. It's like there's this famous story. One famous yogi went to take his bath at the bank of the Ganges, and there's steps going into the Ganges, a bathing god, and he had his shoes, and he said, "Oh, my shoes look like everyone else's shoes. What do I do?" He says, "I know what to do. I'll roll up a little mud ball, put it in my shoe. Then when I come back, I'll recognize it." So he goes take his bath, and everyone says, "Look what the sadhu did. He put a mud ball in his shoe." So everyone rolled up and put a mud ball in their shoe. So it's that kind of following that Bhaktivinoda Thakur did not approve of. And he recommended we not follow in that kind of mood. Sometimes we just don't understand why we do certain things. It just becomes very ritualistic. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur fought against that while picking up the essence of devotion and picking up the essence of service to Krishna. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, many tried to suck him into the politics of fighting the British. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur would never get into the politics. He says, my politics is to spread the holy name of Lord Krishna. And the same thing happened with Prabhupada when he refused to accept his diploma from Scottish Church College. And he was saying that, well, how can we, he told his friend, how can we preach the glories of Lord Chaitanya while we're a captive country? We have to get the British out. And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati in the first meeting convinced Prabhupada that that wasn't true, that the real matter was to spread the holy name and the politics would sort itself out. So that comes from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati and Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Many more things to be said about Bhaktivinoda, and in a short class, that's almost impossible to do. So I want to jump ahead to one thing, and then we'll read a Bhagavatam verse and then answer questions, because if I don't do that, they won't invite me back and I'll be in trouble. You know how all these things can happen. 1896 was a very interesting year in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life. It was a year Prabhupada was born. And it was also the year that Bhaktivinoda Thakur sent the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, a book, and he sent it to McGill University. And he had correspondence with Emerson and other famous transcendentalists of the day. Bhaktivinoda Thakur did start spreading the sublime message of Lord Chaitanya to the Western world. He also, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, had predicted that Westerners would embrace the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And in an article he published in 1885, he not only predicted it, but in the mood of Advaita Acharya, praying for Lord Chaitanya, prayed that someone would come who would emancipate all living beings throughout the universe and preach the eternal religion. And he said, soon someone will come who will actually, oh, for that day when the fortunate English, French, Russian, German, and Australian people will take up banners, madungas, kartals, and raise kirtan throughout the towns and streets. When will that day come? Oh, for that day when the fair-skinned men from their side will raise up the chanting of Jai Sachinanda, and join with the Bengali devotees. So Lord Chaitanya, so Bhaktivinoda Thakur was praying for that day and predicting the coming of Prabhupada. So that's a little tiny piece of the glories of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Now, if I don't, I'll have to read a verse so I don't get in trouble, but that verse is very relevant for Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So 749, my gosh. Okay. Hanyate pasavo yatra nidayer ajita mabi manyana bir iman deham ajir mirtu nasvaram. This is from the deliverance of the Arjuna trees, and we're in 10:10.
9, 10, 10, 9.
9. I got the right verse. Unable to control their senses, rascals who are falsely proud of their riches, their birth in aristocratic families, are so cruel that to maintain their perishable bodies, which they think will never grow old or die, they kill poor animals without mercy. Sometimes they kill animals merely to enjoy an excursion, just like people go hunting in Africa and they'll kill some tigers and lions, and not even for sustenance. They'll kill them just to get their head and mount it with a taxidermist and put on the wall of their house. And it's horrifying to see such things. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was one who knew how to control his senses. Though at that time, when he was at one point in his seeking, he was studying the Christians and Jesus, and he really took a great liking to Jesus Christ's teachings, because Jesus Christ's teachings has a lot of bhakti, love in it. And he said, I like this. The Unitarians were his teachers in Calcutta, and they talked about the universality of religion and how Jesus was teaching love of God. And that part really inspired Bhaktivinoda Thakur, though he wasn't vegetarian. He had, I don't think he ever ate like cow or anything like that, but it was typical for Bengalis to not be strict vegetarians then. And he wasn't. And later he realized this isn't right. And he, just before getting initiated, became vegetarian himself. And I tell the story because we think, because this, most of us in the West, very few of us were brought up, at least the first generation of devotees, none of us were vegetarian. And then we came to Prabhupada and we all became. So the idea was, sometimes I meet some people, especially who are very proud of being vegetarian. And Prabhupada, when I said to Prabhupada, and I met him, I said, oh, Prabhupada, I've become vegetarian. Prabhupada said to me, because I was a little proud, oh, I'm vegetarian. And I was speaking from pride, and Prabhupada said to me, so what? So is a pigeon and the monkey. And the monkey's a rascal causing a lot of trouble. So he put down my pride immediately. So we're proud, we're vegetarian. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur didn't even grow up vegetarian. Or he might have been born vegetarian. I don't know that detail, but then mixing with the British, he dropped it and then realized that that was a mistake and resumed his vegetarian. So the point I'm trying to make is we judge somebody not by were they born in this particular family? Were they brought up this way? We judge someone by where are they at today? Do they actually have devotion and love? And do they show the symptoms of a devotee? So with that, I will stop here as I've been instructed to do and answer any questions you might have. Are there any questions, comments on Bhaktivinoda Thakur, or questions on the verse? So I didn't give the Bhagavatam much attention.
Thank you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu. Beautiful class, very inspirational. Temple room, do we have questions? If not, we'll ask online audience. They're deciding. While they're deciding, I'm going to ask my question. Did Bhaktivinoda Thakur face any opposition from the Vaishnavas of his time for being overly open-minded and playing with Christian concepts?
Well, he got in a lot of trouble, certainly with the Hindus of the time. There was a Hindu group, I think called the Brahmos, that kind of rejected Shastra and tried to embrace modernity. And as I said, it's a tightrope between modernity and tradition. And they fell off the tightrope on the side of modernity and rejected things. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur would philosophically defeat them. And then there were the traditional Hindus who said, you have to be born, how you're born is what counts. Of course, Krishna says in the Gita that how you're born is, he says, what determines your status is not your janma. He never says birth. It's your guna and karma, how you behave, and how you act. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur had opposition from many sides, from the traditional Hindus, from the overly modern Hindus. And then he also had to keep peace between Hindus and Muslims. In one town he went to, the Muslims allegedly were killing cows. One Brahmin went away on a pilgrimage, he came back, his cow was gone. And he had heard that the Muslims had killed the cow. And so then there were Hindu-Muslim riots. This is maybe, guessing around the 1880s, 1870s, or Hindu-Muslim riots. So he had to go and make peace between the Hindus and the Muslims. So everyone kind of mad at him, but he was so expert at making peace that he was able to settle these matters. The British did not want him ever to leave his service as a magistrate because he was the best there was. Completely honest, uncorruptible, and he could quickly make just decisions. But he retired in his 50s because he wanted to dedicate himself to the mission of Lord Chaitanya. And when he retired, even though he was a big magistrate, by then somewhat wealthy and very, very important, he retired and he started going door to door in Calcutta, begging alms to build a temple at the newly discovered birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, because he discovered the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, the Yoga Pit in Mayapur. Traditionally, people had thought that Navadvip was the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. But when he studied, he realized the town of Navadvip only was 100 years old. And he talked to ancient people in the town, and they confirmed all of this. Then he did archaeological work, found ancient maps and old manuscripts. And looking out over his balcony in Navadvip, he saw some kind of mystical mansion appear in his vision, the sky in a certain direction. And he went to that place, and there was even though it was Muslim land, everyone revered this as a holy mound. And on it, they were growing unlimited tulsis. And then he brought Jagannath Das Babaji there, who was 120 years old, and he had to be carried in a basket. And to open his eyes were so heavy that he had to hold his eyes open with his fingers to see. The eyelids just drooped. And that was before they had eyelid drooping surgery.
Did Bhaktivinoda Thakur carry him? Or he had a servant?
No, I think some servants were carrying. I don't think Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I never read that he carried him at least. And then Jagannath Baba got out of his basket and danced. This is it. So by archaeology and research and Shastra and mystical experience, it was confirmed the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. So then Bhaktivinoda Thakur retired, and he started going door to door asking for money. And here it is, a big Hindu gentleman begging like they call it a fakir, Fakir, means a poor beggar. And he became, and the newspaper published an article saying anyone who Bhaktivinoda is blessed by Bhaktivinoda coming to their house must give a donation to him. It's such an honor to receive him. So
thank you. Very, very satisfying answer, Brahmatirtha.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Temple
room is burning. Yeah.
Adi, yes.
Hare Krishna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and I see you well. Your smiling face makes me happy. You always know that.
Prabhupada's grace. The principle, you're talking about the whole situation and the story and his effect, his impact on the situation. The principle we understand is that Krishna is so wonderful that no matter how dark things are, no matter how misdirected a civilization might be, that if we're sincere, Krishna will send someone to help us, to guide us, and to redirect society. The Bhagavatam says that, these literatures are meant to bring about a revolution in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. So we may not always have the confidence, when things look dark, that Krishna knows what's happening. And who was just saying? Somebody was just saying yesterday, if it's a very dark night, then the beautiful moon is even more prominent. The light of the moon is like, by the contrast against the dark background, we appreciate it more. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is a great light in the darkness of the time when religion was, compromised and people were confused. And I think Bhima has a comment there. I see him there with his cowboy hat.
Bhakti Devi has a Bhima Prabhu, yeah.
Let somebody who put their hand up go. I just want to listen.
Bhakti Devi, that was you. We saw your hand.
Didn't Bhakti Vinod Thakur also have 10 children?
Yes, including, of course, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who had no children. And I contemplated that because Bhaktivinoda Thakur had many children, and Bhakti Siddhanta said, if my children could be Krishna conscious, I'd have many, but he didn't have any. My own feeling on that is he did not want, in India, there's such an attraction to the seminal progression. The king has a son who becomes king, and the sadhu has a son. And you find in the Goswamis of Vrindavan who run the temples, they're not really Swamis, but they're descendants of Goswamis. They use the last name Goswami, but it's all by succession. And I think Bhakti Siddhanta understood the danger of that. And so he didn't he didn't have children, even though he could have, and maybe one of his children would have been a successor. But the main thing is it's by qualifications. Now, obviously, if my father's a doctor, there's a better chance of me becoming a doctor if not. But if my father's a neurosurgeon, I'm still not going to operate on Henry's brain based on my own, because my father's a neurosurgeon. So yes, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had 10 children. And one of them, he said, was a ray of Vishnu, which was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Another question from the temple room. I see a hand up.
There's a question coming from Abdullah Prabhu. He's asking him.
Please come up. Please come up. Hare Krishna, thank you so much for that. That was a beautiful story. That was really inspirational. Can we read any books about his interaction with Muslims and Hindus and really learn more about the peace that was going on at the time? Where can we read more about that specifically?
So you want to know about what was going on at the time of...
Right, and how we made peace between the Muslims and the Hindus, because the cow killing is still going on until today. And so I wonder how that would affect.
I mean, there's more must be written. So, I mean, I hope more scholars write more on this. There are books. I mean, Rupa Vilas' book, The Seventh Goswami, sets the stage. It's called the Bhadra Loka, where the educated Indians who were able to integrate into British society. So there are books written on that. I can't recall off the top of my head. The person who knows this best is here with me in Gainesville, is Krishna Abhishek. And Krishna Abhishek, who runs the Institute for Vaishnava Studies now, is this wonderful devotee who has a PhD from the University of Chicago on Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So you can write him. I'll put his email in there, and he can certainly give you reference books on that time. He's much more expert at that than I am. Also, Bhaktivinoda Thakur dealt with another issue, the fifth canto, which we spend a lot of time at the Bhaktivedanta Institute on, because there are parts of the fifth canto that are really heavy. Fifth canto is unique among the cantos, and parts of it talk about the hellish planets. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when the descriptions get extreme, he says, yes, sometimes the Shastra needs to offer a little extremity to bring people to the center, but it's not, some things he said are not to be taken literally. He gave us the hermeneutics, the way to understand the Bhagavatam. And hermeneutics is a very important skill for devotees to have. It means, how do you understand it? Prabhupada gave us a hermeneutics called Guru, Shastra, and Sadhu, a checks and balance system of how we understand Shastra. Because if we don't have good hermeneutics, which Bhaktivinoda Thakur started, hermeneutics go back to Rupa Goswami. He wrote, in our tradition, the first books on hermeneutics. And then this was expanded upon by Bhaktivinoda Thakur and, of course, by Prabhupada. And the idea was, if we don't have that, then we easily become religious fanatics. And again, we're on this tightrope. It doesn't make a difference which side of the tightrope we fall off. Either way, we're falling into an ocean of sharks. So, Krishna says in the Gita, don't eat too much, don't eat too little, don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. He talks about the middle way. So and that applies to many aspects of our life as a devotee. So if we want to be a balanced devotee, we need to kind of, as we say, be a little Buddhist this way and take the middle way approach as advocated by Krishna. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur really exemplifies how to take that middle way. So I urge all of you, anyone here who wonders, how do I deal with modernity versus tradition? Read Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life, read what he did, and then you will be inspired in your own life, beginning today, to understand how to balance your life in a way to improve your consciousness. Simple as that. Okay, with that, I think it's time, 8:07. I think my time is up. Thank you very much. It's always a wonderful opportunity to be at the Bhakti Center. And I wish you all a happy Bhaktivinoda Thakur fast day till noon, I think, or whatever, something like that. Now, if you're really hungry, Prabhupada used to say, today I'm fasting. I will just have some fruit. So if you're really hungry and can't do your service, take a little fruit. If you can fast, that's even better. And then have a blessed day in all regards. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu. Every single sentence you say is just, it's loaded with devotion and knowledge. Thank you very much. Henry, thank you for showing the book. Did you steal that book from the library, or you purchased it? You stole it. Okay. All right. All right. Krishna is our original Buddhist. With that, I'm going to end it. Bhakta Will, Hare Krishna, Rich B, Rameshwar Naik, everybody, Hare Krishna. Have a wonderful day. Brahmatirtha Prabhu ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Hare Krishna.